Hello, my name is Gadil Guadarrama, and I am a student in the Future of Artificial Intelligence course at the University of Galway. In this presentation, I will explore a question that sits at the intersection of AI, pricing, and commercial decision-making. The topic I chose is, from price gaps to pricing decisions, can AI make revenue growth management more explainable, actionable, and trustworthy? What I want to examine is not simply whether AI can automate pricing tasks, but whether it can genuinely help organizations make better pricing decisions in complex real-world environments. I will explain why I chose this topic, why I think it matters, where AI could add value, and what kinds of resources I would use to research it further. I chose this topic because it brings together two things that I find especially interesting: the future of AI and the reality of high-stakes business decision-making. Pricing and revenue growth management generate a huge amount of data and analysis, but in practice, there is often still a gap between insight and action. In other words, organizations may have sophisticated models, dashboards, and reports, but decision makers still struggle to convert that analytical depth into confident and timely choices. I also think this is a strong topic for this course because it is relatively niche. It is not just another presentation about chatbots or general AI automation. It focuses on a commercially important domain where trust, explainability, and decision quality really matter. That makes it both original and highly relevant to the future of AI. To understand the topic, it is important to start with the business problem itself. Revenue growth management, or RGM, is the commercial discipline of improving revenue through levers such as pricing, promotions, pack architecture, and trade strategy. It plays a central role in consumer goods because pricing decisions affect not just margin, but also competitiveness, promotions, negotiations, and market share. One important concept here is the idea of a price gap. A price gap is the difference between the price of a brand and the price of competing products. If that gap becomes too wide, the brand may lose volume. If it becomes too narrow, the business may sacrifice margin. The problem is that pricing decisions are rarely clean. Price, promotion, distribution, and competitor activity all move at the same time. That is why my central question is whether AI can help RGM teams move beyond descriptive reporting and toward decision support that is actually trustworthy and usable. Even with traditional analytics, pricing decisions are still difficult for several reasons. First, the data itself is often fragmented. Relevant information may sit across internal systems, market audits, distributor feeds, and promotional trackers, and these sources do not always align cleanly. That creates a signal problem before analysis even begins. Second, pricing outcomes are driven by many factors at the same time. It is not only price, it is also promotions, mix, distribution, execution, and competitor behavior. That means even strong analytical models require expert interpretation and ongoing revalidation. And third, there is the organizational reality. Pricing decisions sit across sales, marketing, finance, and trade teams, each with different incentives and perspectives. So even when the analysis is sound, it does not always translate into action easily. That is exactly why the bridge between analytics and decision-making remains fragile. One reason I find this topic especially interesting is that this is not a blank slate problem. The case materials already reflect a fairly mature analytics environment. In that context, econometric models were already being used to decompose volume into pricing, promotion, and distribution drivers. There was also a price gap framework, scenario simulation logic, and even suggested action capabilities to identify where intervention might be needed. So the real question is not whether AI can replace the absence of analytics. The more interesting question is whether AI can improve on a workflow that is already analytically sophisticated, but still difficult to use at scale in everyday commercial decision-making. In my view, that makes the topic more rigorous. It shifts the discussion away from hype and toward a more serious comparison between legacy analytics and future AI-enabled decision support. This is where I think AI could potentially add value. The most realistic opportunity is not replacing the models, but wrapping them in a more accessible decision support layer. For example, instead of asking managers to interpret multiple dashboards and model outputs, AI could help explain key drivers in plain language, answer follow-up questions, and make the analysis easier to interact with. AI could also improve scenario exploration. Rather than manually running analyses and translating them into business language afterward, teams could use a more conversational interface to explore trade-offs and possible actions. And finally, AI could support analyst productivity by automating part of the commentary and narrative building process. That matters because a lot of commercial analytics work is not just modeling, it is also explanation, communication, and translation. So the real value of AI may lie in making existing insight more usable rather than trying to replace expert judgment altogether. At the same time, AI would only be useful in this space if it is trustworthy. For me, that starts with explainability. A recommendation is not enough on its own. Business users need to understand what drivers influenced it and why it should be taken seriously. It also requires governance and auditability. If AI is involved in pricing decisions, there needs to be a clear trail of what data was used, what recommendation was generated, and how the final decision was made. Data quality is another core requirement. AI cannot compensate indefinitely for weak commercial data. If product hierarchies are inconsistent or promotion records are incomplete, the system may generate confident recommendations on a weak foundation. And finally, human oversight remains essential. In a high-stakes commercial context like pricing, I do not think AI should act autonomously. The goal should be to support human judgment, not to remove it. This is also why I do not see the topic as a simple success story. One obvious risk is that generative AI can produce explanations that sound persuasive even when the underlying reasoning is weak. In pricing, that is especially risky because correlation can easily be mistaken for causation. There is also the problem of over-automation. If teams rely too heavily on AI outputs, pricing expertise may weaken over time and adoption may become selective or political. People may trust the tool only when it confirms what they already believe. Data quality remains another major limitation. If the underlying signals are incomplete or stale, AI can scale bad recommendations very efficiently. And finally, accountability becomes harder. If an AI-assisted pricing decision leads to a loss, it may not be obvious who is responsible. So, overall, the opportunity is real, but so are the governance and adoption risks. If these challenges are handled well, I think the potential impact is quite significant. Operationally, AI could shorten the time between insight and action. It could help pricing teams detect issues earlier and reduce time spent on repetitive reporting and commentary. Strategically, it could improve consistency in pricing governance and support more structured decisions around price architecture, scenario planning, and alignment between high-level strategy and SKU-level execution. Organizationally, it could make pricing insight more accessible beyond specialist analysts. That would shift the analyst role away from manual preparation and more toward interpretation, judgment, and oversight. There is also a wider market dimension. Better decision support could reduce avoidable pricing errors, but poorly governed AI could just as easily scale opaque or weak decisions across markets. So the impact could be meaningful, but it depends strongly on how responsibly the technology is designed and deployed. If I were to take this topic forward into the final project, I would want to research it from both the AI side and the pricing side. On the AI side, I would focus on explainability, trust, governance, and enterprise deployment. That would help me evaluate not just what AI can do technically, but what would make it credible in a real business setting. On the pricing side, I would look at pricing analytics, revenue growth management, and decision support systems more broadly. I think that is important because this problem sits as much in business practice as it does in technology. The case materials already give me a strong starting point because they show that advanced pricing analytics existed before the current GenAI wave. So for the final report, I would build on that foundation and then use external academic and industry sources to assess whether current AI is truly mature enough to add value in this space. To conclude, I think AI may be most valuable in pricing not as a replacement for established analytics, but as a layer that makes pricing insight more explainable, more actionable, and more usable in real decision environments. That is why I see revenue growth management as a strong future of AI topic. It is commercially important, still unresolved, and much more nuanced than a generic automation story. So the question is not simply whether AI can generate an answer. The more important question is whether it can support better pricing decisions in a way that organizations can actually trust. Thank you for listening.